Every storyteller who talks about Batman eventually runs into the same problem. His origin story has been told so many times that it's practically become modern mythology. Pearls fall in slow motion, a gun fires in an alley, a child kneels between his parents. We all know the beats before the music even starts, so the challenge isn't telling Batman's story again, the challenge is finding a way to tell it so that it doesn't feel repetitive. Unfortunately for Bruce Wayne, the story always begins in the same dark place. After going back and forth on how to approach Batman's story again, I decided the only way to make it feel fresh was to change the angle entirely. Everyone already knows how the story begins and how that night changed Bruce Wayne forever. That moment is still important, but it isn't the whole story. Bruce Wayne didn't become Batman in a single night. He became Batman over many years. He was shaped by the people he met and by mentors who trained him. He was shaped by the allies who stood beside him and the enemies who challenged him. So instead of focusing only on the night his parents died, it's more interesting to look at the people who actually helped create Batman. Piece by piece, they helped turn Bruce Wayne from a man defined by tragedy into the Dark Knight. However, it wouldn't be an origin story unless I actually started in his origin, so we'll begin there. Bruce Wayne was born into wealth and legacy in Gotham City. He was the son of Dr. Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne, two of Gotham's most respected citizens. His father was a renowned surgeon and philanthropist who used his wealth to fund hospitals and public programs, while his mother was deeply involved with charities and social work across the city. They believed that wealth came with responsibility, and they tried to raise Bruce to understand that from an early age. Bruce grew up in Wayne Manor just outside of the city. The estate was enormous and full of staff, but his parents made sure he wasn't raised to be arrogant or careless. They actually spent time with him, read to him, and often brought him into Gotham so he could see the city beyond the walls of the manor. When he was very young, he fell into a cave on the Wayne property and was swarmed by bats. This was an experience that left him with a deep fear and would later become strangely important in his life. After the murder of his parents in the alley, Bruce inherited the Wayne fortune, but the money meant very little to him after that night. He was raised by ALFRED Pennyworth, who became his guardian and the closest thing he had to a father. ALFRED had a background in medicine and military service in many versions of the story, and he raised Bruce with discipline and strong moral guidance. ALFRED tried his best to give Bruce a normal life, but it quickly became clear that Bruce was no longer a normal child. He became quiet, distant, and extremely focused for someone so young. Bruce threw himself into his education as he grew older. He studied science, law, criminal behavior, and even police procedure. He began intense physical training at a young age and pushed himself far beyond what most teenagers would ever attempt. As a teenager, Bruce began to explore Gotham more on his own, and he saw the crime and corruption that existed throughout the city. He saw that his parents had tried to help Gotham through charity and public projects, but crime still ruled many parts of the city. This convinced Bruce that crime couldn't be stopped with just money alone, and that someone had to fight it directly. By the time Bruce reached his late teens, he understood that he couldn't get the training he needed in Gotham. He decided he needed to travel the world and learn from the best detectives, fighters, scientists, and even criminals so that he could understand every aspect of crime. After Bruce left Gotham, he began years of travel and training across the world. He didn't travel as a billionaire, and he often lived under false names so that he could learn from people who would never train someone like Bruce Wayne. He studied criminology in Europe and worked with detectives and investigators to understand how criminals think and how police track them. One of his early mentors was a world-class detective named Henri Ducard. He specialized in tracking people who didn't want to be found, and he was known to be able to follow a target across countries without losing them. He taught Bruce how to track criminals and how to study crime scenes, and he also taught him to think like the person he was hunting. Ducard believed that the best way to catch someone was to understand their habits and routines. While in France, Bruce also met Lucy Chasson, a master cat burglar also known as the Grey Shadow. Lucy taught Bruce how to think like a detective in the real world instead of relying on physical skill or tracking techniques. She showed him how to interview witnesses, how to read crime scenes, and how to build a case step by step. She also taught him patience and restraint because he often wanted to rush towards criminals instead of solving the full case. Through Lucy, Bruce learned that information and observation were more important than fighting. This period of training became one of the key steps in Bruce Wayne developing the investigative skills that later defined Batman as the world's greatest detective. Bruce then traveled through Asia, where he began serious martial arts training. He trained under several masters and learned multiple fighting styles, including karate, judo, kung fu, and even ninjutsu. One of the most important teachers in some versions of his story was a martial artist named Kirigi. Kirigi was a martial arts master who trained Bruce in the discipline of ninjutsu. He was known for being extremely strict, and he believed that pain and endurance were necessary for mastery. Bruce trained under Kirigi in harsh conditions and was pushed to his physical and mental limits. Kirigi focused on stealth, speed, precision, and striking from the shadows rather than open combat. Much of Batman's silent movements, surprise attacks, and the ability to disappear in darkness can be tracked back to his training from Kirigi. In other iterations of his stories, he also traveled and met Ted Grant, also known as Wildcat, who was a heavyweight boxing champion and a vigilante. He was known for his incredible toughness and his ability to keep fighting even after taking heavy hits. Ted taught Bruce boxing and street fighting while also teaching him how criminals fight outside of dojos and tournaments. Around this time, Bruce also trained with other famous fighters such as Richard Dragon and Ben Turner, who was also known as Bronze Tiger. These fighters helped Bruce become one of the greatest martial artists in the world. In some stories, Bruce even trained with a man named Giovanni Zatara, a famous magician and escape artist. He wasn't just a performer, but a master of escaping and deception. Zatara taught Bruce how to escape ropes, chains, cages, and traps, and he also showed him how to use smoke, darkness, and distraction to confuse opponents. Bruce learned that fear and surprise could be just as powerful as strength. Many of Batman's dramatic entrances and disappearance came from what he learned from Zatara. Quick, look, Jim, he's the one responsible for Batman disappearing on you all the time. And we can't forget about one of the most important and dangerous parts of Bruce's training, which began when he encountered Ra's al Ghul and his League of Assassins. Ra's saw great power in him and began training him in advanced combat, strategy, and stealth. He believed Bruce could be his heir. Bruce learned a great deal from Ra's, but he refused to become a killer, and he eventually left, realizing the League's methods involved murder and global manipulation. When Bruce returned to Gotham, he didn't return as a hero right away. He came back as a man with training and a mission, but with no clear symbol yet. He spent time studying the city and watching how crime operated. He also went out at night in simple disguises and started stopping small crimes to test himself and learn the streets again. During one of his early attempts to stop criminals, he was injured and realized a man in normal clothes wasn't enough to scare criminals. That's when he understood he needed to become something more than just a man. Bruce returned to Wayne Manor and began thinking about how he could strike fear into criminals before a fight even started. He knew criminals were often superstitious and fearful, so he believed he needed a symbol that would frighten them. One night, while he was sitting in his study thinking about the problem, a bat flew through the window of Wayne Manor and circled the room before landing. Bruce saw it as a sign and remembered his childhood fear of bats after falling into the cave beneath the manor. It was that moment that he decided he would become a creature that frightened criminals the same way bats once frightened him. After choosing the symbol, Bruce began designing the costume and equipment. He worked through Wayne Enterprises, but he did it secretly through different departments so that no one would know the full plan. Bruce created the suit to look like a bat and to help him move through the night and glide across rooftops. He also began using the cave beneath Wayne Manor as his base of operations, which later became known as the Bat Cave. Bruce then began his career as Batman by targeting organized crime and corrupt officials. His early actions focused mostly on mob families and corrupt police rather than supervillains. But over time, criminals began to fear the dark and started to believe Batman wasn't just a man, but some kind of creature or spirit. The fear became one of his greatest weapons, and it all started when Bruce Wayne returned to Gotham and realized he had to become a symbol instead of just a man. Bruce's life is often defined by a single moment in that alley, but what makes this story remarkable is how far he traveled from that moment. He began as a child who watched his parents die and cried alone in the street, powerless and terrified. From that night forward, he dedicated his life to making sure he would never feel that powerless again. Every year of training, every injury, and every lesson he learned traced back to that night. He didn't gain powers, he didn't receive magic, he didn't inherit some ancient destiny. He built himself through discipline and his relentless will. Over time, Batman became more than a vigilante who fought street crime. He became one of the greatest detectives in the world and one of the most dangerous fighters alive. He fought mob bosses, assassins, masterminds, monsters, gods. He stood beside heroes who could fly and lift tanks and move at impossible speeds. Even so, he earned their respect through his intelligence and sheer determination. He created plans to defeat enemies far stronger than himself. Sometimes he even created plans to stop his own allies if they ever lost control. This showed that his greatest weapon was never his strength, but it was his mind. There were times he faced beings with godlike powers and still refused to back down. He fought aliens, met kings, he battled ancient warriors, he stood in rooms with gods and spoke to them as equals. What made this possible wasn't strength, but preparation and fearlessness. Bruce Wayne turned himself into someone who could walk into any room, face any enemy, and still believe he could win. He didn't start as anything special, but through years of effort and unbreakable will, he became one of the most formidable people on Earth. Batman isn't a story of a man born powerful. Batman is a story of a man who refused to stay broken. The meaning of Bruce's story is best understood by looking at the life he built after that night in the alley. He didn't let tragedy end his life, and he didn't let anger turn him into a criminal. Instead, he chose a path that required discipline, patience, and sacrifice. When he returned to Gotham, he didn't try and rule the city or become famous. He chose to work in the shadows and protect people who would never know his name. That choice defines who he is more than the costume or symbol ever could. He believed that responsibility and self-control were what made someone a hero. This belief is shown many times when he refuses to kill even the worst criminals because he knows once he crosses that line, he would become the thing he fights. His story teaches that pain doesn't have to destroy a person and that fear can be turned into strength. It also shows that discipline and knowledge can be just as powerful as any superpower. Bruce Wayne became Batman because he chose to turn his worst moment into a lifelong mission to protect others. The importance of his character isn't that he's the strongest or the fastest, but that he's human and still stands among legends. Bruce Wayne didn't become Batman because he was chosen or because he had powers. He became Batman because he refused to let the worst night of his life be the end of his story.